Welcome to Psychologist Talks. On today's episode, I want to expand a little bit upon depressive personalities. I have a whole series linked below about depressive personality disorder and why this is such an important construct, a construct that was taken away from our diagnostic manual by history for sciencey related reasons, but also incomplete science, if you ask me. One of the questions I think that often comes up around depression is can it include things other than the more stereotypical wallowing, depressive, woe is me sort of stuff and get more aggressive, get more defensive, get a little bit more spicy? And my answer would be, oh yes, absolutely it can. However, we are talking about slightly different trajectories. So, traditionally speaking, yes, depression is exactly what it sounds. When you look up the medicalized diagnoses around depression, it is focused on a decrease in energy and increase in a sense of worthlessness and hopelessness for the future. But that doesn't mean that's all it's ever going to be. The only thing in the diagnostic manual that gives you any hint that it could be something to the contrary, well, I should say two things. One is they give the allowance for adolescents and children to have anger and irritability a la carte. Why is this not extended to adults? That is an excellent question because I can tell you I've met many angry and irritable adults. In fact, sometimes when I'm feeling chronically depressed as someone who believes himself to have depressive personality disorder, a mild neurotic version, but present nonetheless, I can be a little bit irritable, angry on my not on my best days, right? Am I more frequently depressed, crawl under a rock? Yeah, for sure. But can I be angry and irritable and defensive? Oh, you better believe it. And with that comes a dimensional understanding of depressivity. And there's a lot of contextual variables, even gender-related variables, gender socialization-related variables underneath why depressive personalities and depressive individuals can be a little bit more externalizing, as we call it in the field, a little bit more expulsive, a little bit more on the aggressive side. So yes, we can indeed wallow. Yes, we can definitely sit in the deep, dark realms. Yes, we can want to crawl under rocks, indeed. However, we can definitely become angry. And one of the most fascinating things about anger related to depression is that there is something self-preserving about it. If you think about depression as a kind of a self-destructive force, part and parcel to depression is this like lack of belief in self. There's a smallness to it. There's a shrinking nature behind depression. But when we get angry and when we get frustrated, there's something very protective and says, it's not about me anymore. This sadness is not because of me. It is maybe because of forces external to me. And in a mild form, this can be protective. Often when I'm working with folks with depression, I'm actually stoking this part of them and saying, yes, almost like if you're Star Wars, yes. What does Palpatine say? Like, anger. Succumb to the anger, right? Not what I'm actually going for, but the sense of like lean into it and lean into rebellion because there's something naturally self-preserving. However, in excess, anger and frustration can lead to what we call an external locus of control. That the depressivity, the things that have caused doubt, the things that have caused poor fortune is not because of oneself any longer. It increasingly is because of being wronged by the world around us. Now, I might have a separate episode on this, but this is treading towards what Theodore Malone called negativism. And underneath negativism, a negativistic personality is a tendency to believe, if not a staunch belief, that the world has done them wrong, that there is something fundamentally unfair and unjust about somebody's life. And if only they had been treated better by other people, they wouldn't feel so depressed. And this is the seat, in my opinion, of the creation of the colloquially known term or category known as incels. That incels, when you talk to them, historically, there is often a lot of depression present. This has maybe evolved over time, but we're talking at least the origin story of when incels first were labeled and came onto the scene. There is usually a history of depression and smallness and feeling insignificant But at some point, the ego says, I'm not going to deal with this forever. In fact, I'm going to take this sort of insecurity and flip it on its head, do a complete 180, and start getting angry at other people and the world at large. That I was dealt a raw hand. That if only the world was more just and fair, I would be doing better. And this is where people take their self-destructive tendencies away from themselves, and they start to do things in the service of hurting and harming others. Not to the degree of sadism. If you go listen to my antisocial personality disorder episodes, we're not talking like full-on sadism. But there's definitely this sort of like, I will ensure that other people know my wrath, and maybe indirectly, or to a degree directly, I will do things to make sure I will sabotage the world around me. And it's sort of unconscious belief of like, if I am worthless, I will make the world around me worthless too. A fascinating sort of shift in the depressive personality ideology, to where we can go from self-protective anger to a little bit of entitled anger to quite dangerous anger. Again, perhaps I'll have to do an episode in of itself on negativism. And quote unquote incels. But for now, I'll leave it there. As always, thanks for listening, watching, and stay curious.